I'd like to go ahead and get started and thank everyone who's in attendance today for our Academic Resilience Series. My name is Dr. Ann Gaudino. I'm Director of the Doctoral Program in Education Leadership here at Millersville, an Associate Professor in Education. But also want to make sure that you are very aware of Dr. Margaret Mabinjo, who is really the founder and director of this series. And I'll turn it over, Margaret, for just a minute. Do you want to talk about upcoming sessions after this one, perhaps?
Actually, this semester, we have a different format. We are going to have panel sessions. Our next panel session is going to be under the social work department. In March, we are going to have another session under the nursing department. And then in April, we are going to have a panel for our graduating seniors that have overcome and really beaten the odds to be able to graduate this May. So I am just so grateful for what is in store for you, starting with this one. And again, I want to thank all of you for logging in and for your availability to benefit from this awesome panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mabinjo. So our Academic Resilience Series, which is now in its fourth semester, focuses to bring speakers, in this case, panelists of people who have expertise in being resilient, that they have shown resilience themselves, but also that they can share with us how to be ourselves more resilient as students, as faculty members, as people in education. So I'd like to begin today. We have 5 panelists, just with each of them introducing themselves. And if you could, of course, tell your name, your position, if you're currently in our degree program, what you're doing, or if you're an alumni, please let us know about that as well. And anything else you'd like to share about yourself so that we get a sense of you. So just going left to right across my screen, we'll start with Dr. Khaleel Desaque, and then we'll go into Dr. Danielle Miles. So Khaleel.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gaudino. So Khaleel Desaque, I currently serve as the Associate Vice President of School Transformation at Commonwealth Charter Academy, CCA. I also serve as a part-time professor at Penn State Harrisburg in the Department of Communications and Humanities. Prior to working at CCA, I was director of school improvement for the Pennsylvania Department of Education, have served as, prior to that, high school dean, assistant principal, district staff, and so forth. I'm a proud alum of cohort 1 of the doctoral program, and grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Miles.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Danielle Miles. I am currently working in York City School District. I'm the district administrator over educator effectiveness, equity, and instructional technology. My title keeps on adding, so people say, yeah, that is all those things. I also consult for University of Virginia, their Partnership for Leaders in Education, and I support Pennsylvania's PILS course teaching equity. The focus on leadership. I live in Lancaster City, 3 miles from Millersville University. I have 3 boys. One is experiencing COVID in the college sense, and then the other one is experiencing it in the K through 12 experience. And so that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Dr. Jan Zieger.
Hi, I'm Jan Zieger. I am very happy to be here today. I am an alum several times from Millersville, supervisory of special education, certification, master's degree, and then I too was part of the cohort number 1 for the doctoral program recently and just finished that up right before COVID. So yay. I am currently the special education director at Dauphin County Career and Technology Center. I really enjoy that 9 years here at Career and Tech School, and love career and tech education, love our students, real world experience. It's pretty awesome. So glad to be here.
Thank you, Jan. And we have 2 of our current doctoral candidates. Start with Chris Sattele.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Sattele. Thank you for having me, Dr. Gaudino. I'm currently the high school principal at Middletown Area High School. This is my first year in that role. And the previous 10 years I spent as an assistant principal and principal in the middle school, 10 years prior to that, I was a teacher. I started off my educational career at Mannheim Central, where I was the director of alternative education for grades 6 through 8 before coming to Middletown. And as Dr. Gaudino mentioned, I'm in the process of finishing up my dissertation, finishing up chapter 4 and working with Dr. Tiffany Wright as my advisor. And hopefully I'll be able to get through this and be done in May and add that title to my name. But I'm excited to be here and share anything with resilience. And anytime we can get some great educators together, it's always great dialogue. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Chris. And last but not least, we have Mr. Tommy Henley, who is also a doctoral candidate.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here to talk a little bit about the topic. And so my name is Tommy Henley. Currently, I oversee high schools in the Hartford Public Schools. Prior to that, I spent some time as the director of schools for the School District of Lancaster. And prior to that, I was the CEO of La Academia Partnership Charter School in Lancaster City. So before that, I actually was in Chicago as a teacher through the Chicago Public School, a student in Chicago Public Schools, teacher and principal. I then became a school turnaround specialist and started working to turn schools around across the country, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, doctoral student, I'm entering the first part of the dissertation phase. So Chris, you give me hope that I can make it through to that portion. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk about resilience, and the process of resilience never ends, right? So
Right.
Indeed, especially in this time of COVID. And
Right.
for our attendees who are here, there are even more things about all of these panelists than I think they're going to come out. I hope that each of you looks at least one of our panelists and says, I can really relate to that person. We have just a tremendous wealth here. So thanks so much for introducing yourselves. And I just would like to start with a general question, and I'm going to kind of go in some reverse order here and maybe start with Tommy, and then we'll go backwards from there to Chris, as you'd like to comment. But we have in attendance today undergraduate students, we have graduate students, a few faculty members, but especially for students in college, Tommy and yourself, you're employed full-time. You are a student that takes a lot of time, and you have a lot of other things going. You bring a host of experience from your past. You're someone who has dealt with and lived yourself in large urban settings and in Latino settings and all sorts of wonderful background. What can you share with our students about how to balance school and life and home and work?
yeah, that's a great question. And just to add a little bit more of that context. So yes, I'm Puerto Rican. I grew up, like I said, in the projects of Chicago, first in my family to graduate high school. And so when I went through the Chicago public schools as a student and even as a teacher, I was like, this is the best school system on the planet, because 16-year-old Tommy wasn't looking at a 38% graduation rate. And so for me, I always had that laser focus on what is the goal? And the goal was going to and through college, because we know that is how we end cyclical and generational poverty, right? That is a proven fact. And so for me, that was always the goal. I think in times of adulthood, it's actually become a lot more difficult. My resilience growing up, that's all I knew, right? And so when I was going through college, I lived in that struggle, so it was my norm. And when you normalize a struggle like that, you find ways to overcome barriers. As an adult with COVID-19, I have a really long commute. So I live in the Bronx, New York, but I drive to Hartford, Connecticut to work every day. And doing doctoral work as well as managing several high schools. For me, I stay laser focused on what is my goal and why do I do this work? And so for me, I want to serve students of color living in poverty that grew up in the same settings that I did. And I'm fueled by that every single day. So I know that doing my dissertation is going to lead me to being more effective in doing that. Getting this doctorate is going to show kids that came from my background that we can do that, right? And me leading high school shows that this work that we do of investing in kids is centered around my why. So I would say that resilience for me and balancing everything is do things for yourself that fuel your why. And if you feel that something's taking away from your why, whether it be toxic relationships, whether it be meaningless tasks that you don't feel give life to you, you have to really figure out ways that you can either delegate those to other people or simply remove them from your plate, because it's going to suck the life out of you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Go on to Coach Sattele next. And I say that with a smile because Chris brings such a tremendous athletic and coaching background. And that adds a whole nother layer. So I'm wondering, Chris, if you could, of course, say whatever you'd like, but also for our athletes, how do you balance that school life, work, and also being on a sports team?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And I'm very fortunate of the supports that are put in place with a lot of the people that are here, but I'm a married father of two. My wife is an educator, and I have a 14 and a 12-year-old. And that balance is tough. And then you add on top of it, as Dr. Gaudino mentioned, I was the head high school basketball coach here at Middletown for 10 years. And prior to that, I was a head coach for 5 years. And prior to that, I was a college athlete and trying to work my way through that and being a part of a team. Starting the doctoral program as a head basketball coach probably wasn't the best choice on my end. I didn't realize the time commitment. I had the goal. And again, kind of what Tommy has mentioned, like I wanted to do it and that was my why. And the other part to add to it, we were pretty good. We were ranked 6th in the state of Pennsylvania. We were competing against Imhotep out of Philadelphia. We were just very good and I didn't want to give that up. But then, you add all those things to your plate. As we talk about that proverbial plate, it continues to grow with different things. It can wear you thin, and you got to be very cautious and cognizant of the decisions that you make. And I think Tommy alluded to that, and the others will as well. It's a balance. And even after I got out of coaching, I'm a glutton for punishment. I became the assistant athletic director, which made it more year round. So now instead of being focused from November until March, I was focused year round. So you've really got to do a good job. And you got to get rid of some of those meaningless tasks. And I'm not saying that athletics was meaningless, but I really had to refocus and I really had to make sure that I was doing what I needed to do to keep myself sane, to keep my family intact. There were many of times where it would have been very easy to quit. But again, I think that shows a bad message to the kids that we lead today. You have to be able to persevere and overcome some of that stuff.
Thank you so much, Chris. We'll go on to Dr. Zieger, who, as she mentioned, is a director of special education. And so that leads me to the thought of, folks who have special needs in their education and perhaps have accommodations, that can be an additional layer, to balance. So could you, Dr. Zieger, talk about, all this school life, family, home, but then also if you have some kind of a special situation, how can we balance all of that?
Well, I wanted to piggyback on what the first two gentlemen talked about, because it's a matter, I'm a visual person, so I picture, a pie, like a pizza pie or whatever kind of pie, apple pie, who cares? But you picture this pie and you've got sections in the pie and it's not always even. So what I say to students is take that pie and kind of section it out, and one section is school. How big that section is, you determine. One section is your family, your friends. Don't forget yourself. Self-care, making sure you get enough sleep, enough to eat, things like that. And so when you're looking at that pie, you're saying, okay, this is what I'm going to dedicate to this section. This is what I'm going to dedicate over here. How big is this piece going to be? And it's not forever. So especially the folks who are we're all in the doctoral program or have finished, we have had to think, okay, the bigger piece was the school for a period of time, not forever. So as new students, you're going to have to get used to your friends are going to be a smaller piece of the pie. And then your school is going to be a bigger piece of the pie, if that makes sense. But don't forget your mom. So now going back into special ed, if you have been a student with an IEP when you were in high school, that IEP doesn't follow you, but you continue to have a disability and you continue to be under Americans with Disabilities Act protection, which means you can access supports and accommodations in the setting that you're in there at Millersville. I'm not sure what it's called now. It might be called the Office of Student Services. It used to be called the Office of Disabilities. But what can happen is that you can receive special accommodations, including anything from study groups to the reading lab to writing labs to just all kinds of support. Don't be afraid to ask for it and self-advocate, because you're going to be swamped. it's new. It's a new day. It's not high school anymore. And so you're going to be getting the syllabus and be, how am I going to handle this? But the great thing is there are people to help you. You reach out, you self-advocate, you say, I need this, and where am I going to find it? And really lots of people around the campus that are going to be willing to help you.
Thanks, Dr. Zeager. We're on to Dr. Miles, who is a several-time graduate of Millersville University. Danielle, you've been an undergrad here, a master's, a doctoral student. Probably no one knows Millersville better than you. So what suggestions do you have knowing that full context as well?
Well, I mean, I love Millersville, obviously. It's what's given me the place I'm in. I think, one of the things I value about Millersville is the value they put into work ethic, right? Like this is not an easy thing to get. And so the work is there. And I think naming that is important, but it also builds your capacity to do it in other realms. In places where I've seen colleagues struggle, I'm like, oh, well, this is just par for the course, because this is just how Millersville does it, right? The expectation that you show up as your best self is consistent. So that was one of the things, and I picked up for Millersville. One of the pieces I want to add on, and I agree with many of the things that folks had said, but I want to elevate that this is a dual pandemic, right? We're functioning in a space where COVID's elevated, but also the systematic injustices and the racism is being elevated consistently. It's always been historically there, but the spotlight is definitely on it, and so we're functioning in that context as well. And if you're functioning in that context as a person who's been underserved, you also have to figure out how you situate yourself and how you navigate those spaces. I was coaching a principal this morning kind of through this space. We were actually just kind of unpacking that and discussing the idea of going through seasons of like surviving and then thriving. And the Corona coaster creates a space of surviving, and then you may thrive a little bit, but then you're back to surviving, and then you may thrive. Understanding it's seasonal though, right? Like, how do you navigate the season and understand that you can do anything for a little while to push through to that thriving space? And I think the mindset around that is essential in this context, but in any context where you're trying to get to whatever goal you set for yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Miles. Last but not least, Dr. Dasak, you have worked a variety of positions, Baltimore Public Schools, you've been in the Lancaster area, you have been at the state level, you've seen all of Pennsylvania. And while we have a lot of students at Millersville who come from the local area, we have some who come from neighboring states or other parts of Pennsylvania. So certainly having your perspective is valuable. So just from the 10,000 foot view that you have had, what suggestions do you have?
Wow, the benefit of going last is you could just say ditto to everything that was said before you. So I concur with everything that was said by my colleagues. If I could just add that, first of all, from my personal experience, it really made me strengthen my faith, right? The importance of really falling back into your belief system and really, being driven by your why, your purpose, is very, very important. The importance of time management, making sure, really, categorizing, life events, whether they're personal or professional. So what are priorities? What are needs? What are wants? What are must-dos? What are things that have to take a backseat? Time management is so important. The importance of having professional trust and reaching out for collaboration and for support, and having professional trust in the process. When your professors are asking you to do something a certain way, is because they have the historical knowledge and the institutional knowledge and the foresight to tell you what they foresee that you may not see or have seen or have experienced. Having that professional trust with colleagues to be able to support one another through the grind, through the tough times, through when the times you're burning the midnight oil to complete a research assignment or a paper, or receiving critical feedback where you thought that you produced a really, really good piece of writing and you get feedback otherwise. So just, being open to grow, being driven by your why, and really being humble, being accepting to the process. And then when you have achieved, success, however you qualify or quantify success, being able to give back and help others and support others on their journey. I identify with, all of my panelists, co-panelists on this discussion. When Tommy mentioned living in the Bronx, I'm born and raised in the Bronx. So I grew up in the projects in the Bronx, and, being the first person in my family to, attend college and graduate college. But in the same token, leading, schools in high, numbers of poverty and low graduation rates and urban plight and despair, as Danielle talked about, how do you support others and how do you inspire others in a pre-pandemic environment, in a currently in this pandemic environment where all of the isms and inequities have been elevated, as Danielle said, and what will that post-pandemic world that in an unprecedented space look like when this is all said and done? In my parents' generation, education was the greatest civil rights inequity that existed, but has that really changed in 2022? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone. So many great thoughts. I'd like to open this up to any of the panelists who might like to speak on the next topic, which is to you personally. If you would be willing to share some struggle that you have had, that you faced balancing school, work, and home, and how you personally dealt with that. So open it up to any panelist who might like to speak on that.
One of the things that has come up is, I would name that the pandemic has elevated things that we've put in our closet, right? Like skeletons that we thought we could keep in and locked in. And working in education, one of the most comfortable spaces we have is talking about students and children. We typically don't like to deal with our adult issues, right? But we bring our crazy selves to work. And so one of the things that the pandemic has elevated is just the managing of the mental health or the trauma triggers that we have brought as adults, just in any space. And I'll speak specifically to even my own, like this claustrophobia, or being closed in is a trauma trigger, while being restricted in a pandemic is what happened. And so I had to name that actually is a trauma trigger for me. Like when they said you can't go outside or you can't do, that was triggering and creating anxiety for me because it was something that I've carried through. And I got to a place where, like, you know what? And back to Khalil's point, like my faith led me, was like, okay, God, I'm not carrying this no more. So let's talk about where we're going to drop this off at, because I'm tired. It's about to break my back. But it was elevated as a result of, which I consider a benefit, right? Not all things are good, but they work for the good when you're clear about it. What's happening, and is continuing to happen, is that this is really elevating our own adult space, and things that we thought we could keep in our little backpack or in our little closet, the knots come out. They're out of there. So managing my own spaces, but when you lead adults, then helping support and manage that in a healthy way as well.
Yeah, I think I actually wanted to build on Jan's point a little bit with this one, because my struggle with this school year in particular was, during the pandemic, I realized that, and it was actually it wasn't healthy, but I really gave like my all to the adults that I had managed. Like I was the principal that was at work, first person, stayed, worked on Saturdays, was there on the weekend, particularly when I was the CEO at La Academia, because that was my whole life. And not being from Lancaster, I that's what I did. And through the pandemic, it's taught me that like I deserve that space and I deserve personal time. And that's why I said earlier, like this idea of resilience is continuing, because to me, 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't care about my personal time. I was like, I have enough personal time. I have 2 hours at night. I have to read for the doctoral program. It is what it is, or I'll have Sunday evenings or whatever. And now I'm like, no, there's going to be a hard stop at 5 and I'm going to take my time back, because for me, that's what resilience looks like. And so I like when Jan talked about like adjusting your pie. And I really like what Dr. Miles said about like thinking about your own triggers and identifying what are those key elements that like are really sacred to you and holding them sacred. And they'll change. Like I said, mine change with personal time. And my adults, I give them all that they, you know, all that I can. But at the end of the day, when they're trauma triggered and I'm trauma triggered and I don't have personal space, I'm not going to be effective in supporting them. And so I've realized that through the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go a little more practical. When I started taking classes in the doctoral program, I'm probably the oldest one here, I was faced with everything's online. And I'm a paper and pencil kind of person. I even have my notes here. And so it's like, well, all of the articles I had to read were online. Okay, I printed everyone out until they started being like 98 pages and I can't keep printing them out. Okay, and then everything is done online and submitted online. So for all of the, you know, audience here that you're, you know, 30 and younger, no problem. If you're around a non-traditional student around my age, there's where resilience comes in. Embrace it. Say, hey, I want to learn. I want to know how to do this. I want to be able to be efficient and navigate all of this and reach out to your, you know, peers in your classroom and your professor and everyone to just say, I'm going to embrace this because I'm so excited to learn so many platforms. And, you know, my organization was able to improve 100% because everything was intact on this laptop. And, you know, on this little, rather than mounds and mounds of paper. And so I might sound ancient, but I'm just saying it was an awesome experience. So you're going to learn a lot of new things that really, you know, it's going to keep you young. It's going to keep you learning and vibrant and relative, which is all very important. So just encourage you.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of Jan. And I've known Jan for a very long time. We worked together at Middletown. And shared some students with one another. But that piece that she talks about is important. I as a student, struggled. I've struggled my entire life. I have ADHD. It's something I still live with. Didn't recognize it till I was in college. I'm not a strong student in terms of A's and B's. I was never an A and B student. I was always a B and C student. And it was a reality check when you go into these programs and these brilliant minds, like everyone that's here is a brilliant mind. And you have to take a deep breath and take a step back and say that you're capable of doing it. And that's very difficult, you know, because we as adults and we in educational leadership, we're constantly trying to build people up. But when you're beating yourself up, that also, you know, takes a toll on you. So I struggled. Like my biggest weakness is my writing. It's not communicating. I can sit and communicate with anyone, but my biggest downfall has always been my writing. And you do a lot of writing. And you'll see your growth from your first semester to your third semester to as you continue to go. And, you know, you got to also take those times to pat yourself on the back, those small moments, those monumental moments where you can take a step back and say, this has been good for me. You know, we're constantly giving constructive criticism, whether it's to teachers or to paras or to students. But when someone gives it to you, you have to be open to it and you have to be willing to take that constructive criticism and use it to make yourself better. And if you can't do that, or you're not the type of person that can get that feedback, none of your professors are out to get you, but they're going to demand that you raise your level to get to where you need to be. And I think there's something to be said about that because at the end of the day, and I think Dr. Gaudino is the one who has preached this the most, anybody can write a dissertation, but is it going to be good? And is it going to be a good piece of work? And is it going to contribute to things? And when you sign your name to it and you put Millersville University onto it, that means something. And I'm a big believer in that. And I think, you know, you're going to have those moments of doubt. You're going to have those moments where you think you're not good enough. And that happens to everyone. And I always tell people say, I don't care what other people think, or I'm my own person. That's great. And that's a lot of bravado. But at the end of the day, you really have to be able to self-reflect. You really have to be able to internalize things. And then you have to make a choice. Like, do you want to do it? Like my thing was I had to give up being an athletic director or assistant athletic director and really refocus myself. And people are there to help you. Your professors, the writing center, all of those things. And, you know, I speak very candidly about how I am as a student. So I think if I can do that, anybody can do that. And I think if you can work your way through this, you'll be very happy with the end result.
And if I can add, it goes back to your purpose. Your purpose has to be bigger than the circumstances that you experience. Case in point, I entered the program as a practitioner, having served, years, as a teacher and as a K-12 administrator, but then being able to learn how to be an effective researcher added to not only my repertoire, but also my level of effectiveness. Case in point, anecdotally, through lived experiences, I knew what poverty was. I've lived it. I've experienced it. I entered Dr. Gaudino's poverty class, saying, I'm an expert on poverty. But having that researcher lens of that experience, I still have my book, whatever it takes, right in my office. Because being able to harken back not only through my anecdotal lived experiences, but then also what is demonstrated in the research adds to my level of effectiveness, but also it allows me to speak to a greater mass of people. So it's just, going through the process, trusting the process, but also keeping in mind that there are going to be a multitude of barriers that are going to be thrown at you. COVID is, a barrier that no one saw coming, and that chapter is still being written. But there are other barriers that may exist. Personal barriers, family barriers, economic barriers, and so forth, and the list continues. But keeping your eyes on the prize, keeping the end in mind, and knowing that it's one day, it's 1 week, it's 1 month, it's one class. There's continuously, forward momentum that must be demonstrated, and making small progressive steps and taking time to celebrate those steps, but also learning from the experiences in taking those steps and using it to apply to the next level or the next challenge or whatever, is to come.
Thank you all. Great words of wisdom. For anyone who's attending this session right now, if you have questions for the panelists, please just put those in the chat, and we'd love to get to them. I'm going to give one more question out to the panelists for them to respond, and then we'll go over to questions. So many great ideas from all of you, and thank you so much. Would like to get now your top 3. If you could share with us your top 3 best ways of dealing with managing the schoolwork home, kind of in a list or like a Reader's Digest version, 3 bullet points. And I'm going to throw this one to Chris Sattele first of all, again, and maybe even along the sports line too for our athletes who are with us. Top 3 tips you have, Chris.
Definitely. And again, I think we all pride ourselves in certain things, and one of my things is organization. And what I would do at the beginning of the week, I would make my list of what I had to accomplish for the doctoral work, what I had to accomplish at home with my family and my wife and kids, and then what I had to accomplish at work. So I would visually want to see what that was and what I had to get done that week to be able to set myself up for success. So the first thing was that time allotment. I'm not really an early riser, even though I'm in education, but I would get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and I would dedicate at least 1 hour to an hour and a half of reading. That would be my time. And I would do that in the morning because it was quiet. I could have a cup of coffee, I could do it. And then I would also put into my calendar through the course of the week where I had gaps where I could do some of my work. And I literally put it in my calendar. So I would stop whatever I was doing and I would redirect myself to get on the computer, like Jan said, read the articles, write the responses, reply, or if you're working in a group project, getting in touch with, the people who you were working with. And then I think the last part, or the third bullet, so to speak, was just getting feedback from people, just asking, hey, how can this be better? What can I do differently? And then redoing that. And Khalil kind of mentioned that one step in front of the other, one day in front of the other. If you look at the entirety of any program that you're in and you just look at that end piece, it's overwhelming. So you really have to chunk it and you really have to put it in manageable, attainable goals. I've always told my players, you can't win a state championship before you win your tip-off tournament. So we've always tried to focus on that first game that's in front of us. And if you start looking at your successes and you get too high or you get too low, you're not balanced. So in this process, you're going to knock a paper out of the park, and it's going to come back and it's going to be great feedback and you're going to be on top of the world. And then you're going to turn around and you're going to turn in another paper and they're going to tear it apart. And you're going to feel defeated and deflated and think, why am I doing this? Never get too high and never get too low. And that's the biggest thing that you got to constantly remind yourself of.
Thanks so much. I'll open it up to the rest of the panel. Top 3 pieces of advice that you have on this balance.
Well, I could jump in and say, one is limit your social networks. I mean, even post-doctoral, if it's not about my immediate family or my extended family or my close friends, those external social networks, they have to be cut off because you have to prioritize, what's important. So, the importance of, drawing strength from family and immediate friends. Time management is crucial. Effective time management and proactive scheduling is crucial to success. And then, Dr. Martin Luther King said it much better than I can ever say it when he referenced the fierce urgency of now. Tomorrow is not promised. So don't procrastinate. Don't put off for tomorrow or next week or next month what you can do today, because you don't know what challenges tomorrow or next week or next month will bring. So, every moment counts. Make sure that you are working towards a specific goal in every action that you take, in every activity you partake in. Every paper you write for every class that you take should, have a common theme or a common thread as you're always thinking about the end in mind, working towards a completed dissertation. Just being as proactive in your thought process, but also letting your words and your actions be parallel to one another would be my top 3.
I can jump in with mine. My first is to just create a non-negotiable schedule. If you know that there's a class like for your major that you have to take at 12 o'clock, put that in your schedule because that's a non-negotiable. If you know that you have to work to support yourself, and let's say the minimum is 20 hours, build that out. So whatever those non-negotiables are, create that schedule. The second is be vulnerable and seek help. I know somebody had put it in the chat and we do all have a lot of experience and, but again, I want to name the vulnerability that it takes even now. I can tell you that 2 months ago, I had a conversation with Dr. Gaudino because I hated the system of oppression in education. And I was like, why do we even do this? Right. And I'm like a whole doctoral candidate for educational leadership. So that was fun, but really leaning on those resources and support. So your professors that you can talk to about those things. If you're really struggling for food, the university has resources for food insecurity. There are a lot of supports that are in place. And I feel like if you're attending this, that's a first step in you saying one, I need support, or I'm taking advantage of the support that's being offered. So leveraging those other supports. And then the third is journaling. Now, I'm not I have way too much going on that I'm not going to sit there and journal a whole page. There's no way I can do that every day. But what I do is I have a daily reflection journal. And basically it's a small book. It's tiny and it's big enough for one sentence. So my reflection is always one positive thing that got me through the day, whether it be a student giving me a fist bump on the way in, whether it be a kid that came from the Dominican Republic getting accepted to college, whatever it is. That one thing I write down before I go to bed every single night, and that helps me to be motivated for the next day.
I can add, I think it's similar to a lot of others, but one of the things that came up was that you're not your successes or your failures. And I think when you're very clear on that, you're on a journey. You're on a journey, you've defined your why, but you also need to understand your core values and what you stand on. Two of my core values are love and truth. And I believe that when you love someone, you tell them the truth. And that's essential. And so I want to say that because someone asked the question, how do you tell your friends? If I love my friend, I'm going to tell them the truth, right? I love you. However, this time is important. And that's hard, but that's understanding that I'm not my successes or my failures, that I'm just me. I'm just Danielle, and that's what it is. And it's just part of my life. The second one leads into that is you know, how you hold space with people and when you hold space with people is important. And I say hold space because time is essential, and time can either work for you or you can work for it, right? It works for you when you're intentional of how you hold your space. Just like now, it was important that I got on here to hold space with the people on here because they bring me life. Like seeing Chris brought me life. You know, I can go into the whole long story of it, but that's true, and that's of value. And so even in this space now, I'm going to leave better as a result of how I'm holding my space with people. And that ties into the idea of healthy relationships. Like all of that goes back over and over and over again. Like, what is it? What's your relationship with yourself? What, like Tommy said, like, what do you say to yourself, right? What's the language you speak? Do you speak life or do you speak death? All that is essential to this work. It's not enough to go say, oh, great job, if you can't look yourself in the mirror and say, you got this. I'm not my successes or my failures. I'm Danielle, I got this. And so whatever that is, I have to stand in it. I know who I am, and that's essential. So those would be the three that I would give.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and be practical again. And so what I do, I have lived by this system, organizational system for years. I list all of my tasks and I list them then by A, B, or C. A, I have to get it done today, B, tomorrow, and C, next week. And then I list it 1, 2, 3, 4, however long. If I have 10 on the A list, it's going to be a busy day. So of course, when you are in your dorm room, when you are in the library, when you're on campus, you're going to get interrupted. But the great thing is you have your list that as soon as that interruption is done, you go back to the list and you say, I was on A9. Okay, I'm going to start back up on A9. Otherwise, you with ADHD, or if you don't even have ADHD, you say, well, where was I? What am I going to do? You have to constantly keep that focus. So I make a list. I do that every morning, and I don't always get everything done. So then I have to draw an arrow to the next day and put it on the next day's calendar. But that's what I do. And it really does help me stay focused, get the job done. You're going to be given a syllabus for the entire semester, which is unlike high school. So for those new students, you're not going to be given a daily assignment or even a weekly assignment. You're going to be given assignments for the entire 9 weeks. How do you map that out? So several of our panelists have talked about putting that on your calendar, making sure that you have the due date set so you know what's coming. But then your daily task list is going to tell you, all for that project, what am I going to do today to get that done? I also have a dedicated email for school. So you might have, ilovechocolate.org or whatever for whatever you want. You probably want to have a more professional one, email for school, and probably your Millersville email would be perfect. But you're only going to want to use that for school things. And when you're working on projects with other students, you're going to want to use that email so that you don't get mixed up finding, my friend in this class emailed me that assignment and that's over in that email. And then it's really focused so that when you're opening that email, you know that's all about school. You know everything you need is right on that email, and you make little folders and you move things into the folder, and that's all about school. That will save you so much time of hunting and looking and getting all confused. And when I say a dedicated spot to do things, what I mean, it could be your dorm room, it could be a spot in the library that's just yours. When I wrote my dissertation, my spot was ocean front, looking out at the ocean, my laptop, I could even show you the picture, and writing. I didn't take anybody with me. I just sat there and wrote the chapters, okay? You're gonna need a spot dedicated. I can't learn with a bunch of people and music around me. So again, that might make me sound a little older, but what I'm saying is you're gonna have to decide where you can learn best. And then I had a friend, Brett, his family was upstairs, he was in the basement. It didn't even look so pretty. It wasn't even a finished basement. He had a desk down there. That's where he worked. And he got the job done. So I'm saying like a dedicated space. So your task list, your dedicated space, and I love the why. Keep that in mind as well. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for such a wealth of wisdom. We do have some questions that are coming in from our audience. Again, we have in attendance today undergraduate students, we have freshmen, we have doctoral students, we have master's students, we have folks who are in their 20s, we have folks who are in their 60s, and we have faculty. So we have really a lot of folks, and appreciate you speaking so broadly to such broad audience. The first question that came up is directed to Chris Sattele. And Chris, the question is, how did you learn best with ADHD? I have 2 learning disabilities, and it's very hard to balance everything with them, but also remembering everything I have to do.
Yeah, so I'm 44. So back when ADHD started to really become prevalent, it was throw medication at it. And I was never really a big fan of that. My parents weren't either. As I've gotten older, though, I realized like I do need medication. I think it was probably, I married my high school sweetheart, but you truly don't know somebody until you live with them. And I think after the first year of marriage, my wife was ready to just walk out. So I knew that I needed to figure something out and quickly to make sure that I didn't lose my better half. So medication definitely played into it. But I think the biggest thing with learning styles is I started audio recording myself, auto recording readings or things that I had to do. And I would constantly listen to those when I got in my car. Another thing, I have very light sensitive eyes, and that sounds weird, but think about schools and lighting and everything else. I had colored sheets that I would put over top of what I was reading to take away that glare. Or I would put it in a different contrast on an iPad so that I'd be able to read those things. And then honestly, with my iPhone, I would work, like I'd say, I would write for 20 minutes and then I would take a 5-minute break. And I would write for 20 more minutes and take another 5-minute break. But I really tried to stay on that schedule. That's not conducive. You see so much stuff out there on the internet about how to write your dissertation or how to write your master's thesis, or you can do it in 1 hour a day. I don't believe that you can do that. Like, you do have to dedicate your time. And I kind of had to retrain myself as an adult student to kind of go back to some of the things that helped me in high school and college. And as I mentioned, B's and C's were what I was aiming to do. I was never really an A student. So I think, when you talk about learning disabilities and that struggle, it's going to add a barrier for you, but you just have to find kind of what works best for you. So finding that spot that Jan talks about, being present in the moment, kind of what Danielle talks about, and, recognizing your deficiencies and trying to find the best ways to make it work. So for me, medication, the lists, the charts, it's crazy. That's how it worked for me.
Can I piggyback off that as well? So I too was diagnosed with ADHD, but I was diagnosed as an adult. And Chris is absolutely right. And if I can add also, the importance of maintaining your health, making sure that you're getting regular checkups at your doctor's office and you're following doctor's advice, managing your diet, exercise, all of that stuff from a physical standpoint. And there are times that medication is warranted. I make no bones about the fact that I take Adderall as needed to, manage my ADHD and that sort of thing also. So, but we can't use, disabilities and ailments to let it overshadow our lives. And we can't use it as a crutch or as a barrier, but rather to know the challenges that exist and to utilize them to offset them with your strengths to overcome challenges that maybe the next person doesn't have to deal with. It is a taboo subject in many communities. It is becoming more mainstream where people are, opening up and sharing some of their unique challenges and ailments and disabilities and illnesses and that sort of thing. But just making sure that you seek the support, you seek the university supports that are available, whether it's through the counseling office or it's available through the ADA or, whatever have you. There are just so many resources out there, university driven, there's resources within the community. But, it's when we open up and we share our story. I don't know if Chris and I was in a conversation that it would have been on the forefront of either one of our conversations. Say, hey, by the way, I got ADHD. So it's sharing our story and listening to perspectives and learning and growing from one another that you find some of these mutual connections. And what works for you, what I can share what works for me, and then we can find that we learn from one another, socially and collaboratively.
Thank you so much. Next question. All of you are superlative in the work that you do. I worked for 33 years in academic IT at Wichita State University. I'm interested in the doctoral program at Millersville. What sort of ideas would you have for someone like me that's interested in research? I have done grant work with the TRIO programs. So a question specifically about doctoral work.
Do it. Just do it. I had always wanted a doctoral degree when I was 10. I just did. I love education. In fact, I really miss taking classes right now. And so if you're interested in research, the field needs you. We need more research so that we can learn what works, and then we can inform the field no matter what field you're in. And so I'm so glad to hear that you're interested in it. And, again, probably as the oldest student who applied, with all that experience, that's awesome. You have so much to give. And so in your cohort, you will be able to help others with the experience that you have. And I was in a cohort with, I guess some of our cohort, they were in their 30s, and I was just still able to relate and support and encourage, and then they were able to help me as well. So, that's the practical side. But yeah, I'm not sure your specific question, but I would just say bite the bullet, just do it. You won't regret it. You really won't.
And I would say, and I don't know what you lean into, but that technology piece, considering our context right now, access helps level the playing field for a lot of our students and our families. And I know that the Millersville program focuses on both technology and poverty. The pandemic is highlighting that. It sounds like you're coming with some technology background. And so that piece, that access piece, which is so essential for the students and the families that we serve, and for the focus of the program, I would say I would imagine you'd be an asset. But it's a story we tell ourselves, right? Like, am I a doctoral student? Is a story we tell ourselves. Like Chris said, when I walked in day one, I couldn't even believe that I was actually sitting in that spot, because my Black background, like Tommy and Khalil, like, I know what it is to be broke, right? I know exactly what that is. And so to even believe that I would be in that spot, I had to tell myself that story in that moment, and continuously tell myself that story in that moment. And so if that is really where you're at, then tell yourself that story, that's who you are, and one step at a time.
And to piggyback over what Danielle said, the piece around instructional technology and educational technology is really our here and now, but it's also where the future of education is. Here at Commonwealth Charter Academy, pre-pandemic, we were half the size than we are now, and growing. And now our school is larger than the school district of Pittsburgh. So with that being said, nobody foresaw this coming. The pandemic has led to the fact that education now in the virtual space, both K-12 and higher ed, there's not a hard start and a hard stop. This is going to be very fluid and very continuous, for years and years to come. So the field is needing more people with backgrounds in technology and IT and all of these other areas that pre-pandemic were very niche and very specified to, very practical and pragmatic reasons and ways to publicly educate, both students at the K-12 level, but also on the higher ed level. So.
Great, thank you. We have one last question, and this is, how do you not let your friends' lack of mental stability hinder your own mental health? In other words, how do I kick them out of my dorm room and give myself space in a nice way, of course? So making space for ourselves. Who'd like to address that?
You got to make it a priority. And if they're truly your friends, like we say this all the time, they'll understand, but you've got to express to them why it is, what's your why and why you want to do it. And as a traditional student, I think back to those, long bus trips where, guys wanted to listen to music or play cards, and, they were all very, very smart and didn't have to worry about their work. I had to use that time to try to figure it out. My space wasn't a library. I never felt comfortable in one. I went to Elizabethtown College for my undergraduate. I know where the library is at. I didn't spend a lot of time in it. I spent a lot of my time in our locker room or training area when everyone left, because that was a quiet space for me to go, which was always good. But if you know where you want to go, you got to create that roadmap, and you got to get rid of some of those obstacles. I think Tommy talked about, being deliberate with those toxic relationships. I'm not saying that they're toxic, but if they're really in it for you and they want to see what's best, you've got to be able to say to them, you got to go. It's time to get moving. I got to get to work. And if they don't respect that, then, you may have to cut ties with them. But, for your own mental sanity, any type of work, undergrad, graduate work, you're always going to question your mental stability regardless. So that's part of the process. So always believe in yourself and surround yourself with people who are like-minded.
Well, just to piggyback off that, two quick things. The commonality in English, Spanish, French, and Russian, they all languages share the word no, right? And they all mean the same thing. So you got to know when to use it, and be bold with it when appropriate. But furthermore is that you can't control what other people do. You can only control your own actions. And you have to know when it's time to remove yourself from a situation because it's not in your best interest. So, sometimes you may have to be the person that leaves and inconvenience yourself by leaving your dorm room and maybe go to the library or go into another space that's quiet where you can be able to complete your work. It may be annoying. It may be time consuming. It may be all of those other things, but keeping that end in mind will justify the means that it takes for you to get there. So sometimes you have to remove yourself from that tough situation, as opposed to expecting others to clairvoyantly know that they're being an inconvenience, or they're making too much noise, or they're not supporting your priorities. You may have to remove yourself from that situation.
I would also share that just like being very clear about what your boundaries are. So like I said, I shared earlier, like my adults at work sometimes are challenging. And so for me, I tell everyone very clearly from 6:30 to 7:30, I'm going to be at the gym and I don't bring my phone in. So like my hard barrier for myself was I'm not bringing my phone to the gym with me. And everyone, including my family and friends, like I told them, like, if you call me between 6:30 and 7:30, like clockwork, I will be at the gym and I will not answer. So even if it's an emergency, unfortunately, like that's my barrier, that's my me time. And so although it's not that related to academics, it's so important with that self-care.
One last question, and I think all of you probably have some great advice on this. Any tips for commuters? I live an hour away from home with my mom and grandparents who require care and patience from both of us. We have pets. My mom and I both work.
I feel like I'm the king of commuting because I literally live, work, and go to school in different states. So for me, and just some context, I moved to the Bronx in January of last year, but I still had an apartment in Lancaster. I just never stayed there until the end of the school year. And so when I worked for a school district of Lancaster, I was driving from the Bronx to Lancaster City 3 days a week. So king of commuting. And now my commute 2.5. People are like, you're crazy. And I'm like, no. For me, there are two things that I do that are super practical. So number one, I like reading online. I know a lot of people like the paper, but my Kindle is like my favorite thing ever. So all of my textbooks are on the Kindle. And if you have the Apple version, it just came up with an update where you can have it read it to you. So I just put on the Bluetooth in my car and it dictates it for me. And you can say like, hey Siri, underline that sentence, or hey Siri, add this note, and it'll annotate it for you. So that's been really helpful for me, especially with the doctoral work. Last semester, I tested it out. It was great. The other thing too, is I figure out like, how can I be most productive during that time, right? Like, obviously you don't want to respond to text messages. You can't respond to emails, but we do have the privilege of having Bluetooth. So any parent phone call or staff phone call I need to make, I do in that hour and a half. And so that time for me is specifically to be on the phone. So that frees up some time during the day when I typically would be calling families or calling my mom back or calling my staff member back. I make time during that block when I'm driving. So figuring out ways that you can free up some of your time through that commuting time, but also obviously being safe.
I was going to say the same thing Tommy said, like really lean into how technology could be a resource for you with that reading aloud to you while you're on the commute. But I would also, and I didn't say this in the top 3 because it would be a 4, but this idea of practicing the pause, you have to be able to, multitasking isn't healthy. And so sometimes when we're commuting and we're doing this, we start going like this and everything gets done and nothing gets done well, right? So you have to be able to practice a pause and situate things where they're at. So if you're using that time to commute and you're saying, okay, this is the time I'm going to dedicate to listen to this coursework, then that's the time I'm dedicated. I can't be making 5 calls in between and stopping and starting and stopping and starting, because that's what sometimes we'll end up doing, because it's convenient and it's nice. And so I would really like that time, again, do you work for time or does time work for you? And really thinking through that, but that practicing the pause and what's important right now and what am I taking care of right now? What's important right now and giving yourself grace when something else needs to pause.
And with that pause, we too need to pause because our time is up. So we'd like to thank those of you who joined with us today for this live panel presentation as part of our academic resilience series. We do this once a month. And if you're a Millersville student or faculty member or employee, then you get our MVille Daily and you'll see the next session. These come again in February, March, and April. And we're focusing this semester on panels because we have such a wealth of knowledge with some of the folks who we have right here. So would really like to extend a huge thank you to our panelists today, Dr. Khaleel Desaque, Dr. Danielle Miles, Dr. Jan Ziegler, doctoral candidate Chris Sattele, doctoral candidate Tommy Henley. Thank you so much for the gifts of your time and wisdom. So thank you everyone for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Best of luck to everyone.
It was amazing. Thank you.